Hi everyone. We are starting a new unit today on measurement and trigonometry, and we're actually going to divide this unit into two parts. So we'll focus first on measurement, where we'll look at various units of length using different measurement systems, and how do we convert units of length, how do we convert units of area and or volume. And then we will also look at surface area and volume. So that will be the first part. And then in the second part, we're going to learn all about trigonometry. Okay, so the first lesson is basically taking a look at the various systems that we can use to measure length, and how do we convert between the systems, how do we solve problems involving conversion of units. Okay, so most of you will probably be familiar with this already, but there are basically two different systems that we can use to measure the length of something. One of them is the Imperial System, and the other one is the SI system. It stands for Standard International. I think it's French. In fact, I know it's French. I'm not going to try and do better with that pronunciation, because I'm sure I won't. But most people know this system as the metric system. Okay, so the units of length that you will see in the imperial system are, the smallest unit of length is the inch. And you can abbreviate that with IN. You might see the foot. That's the next biggest unit of length. You will see the yard and the mile. And the mile is abbreviated MI. Okay, so it has an I in it, and that will become important in a minute. The metric units, the smallest unit of length that we typically see is the millimeter. Okay, then there is the centimeter. There is the meter, and this is the standard unit. And then there's the kilometer. Okay, and actually there are units in between. There's, for example, something called a decameter or a decimeter. Okay, there's various other units as well, but we don't really see them in everyday use very much. So these are the four that are most commonly used. One thing I do want to talk about a little bit is just where these systems came from, because I think it's kind of interesting. The imperial system came from Britain, and it's a bit older than the metric system. And it was very much tied to the monarchy. So for a while, for a couple hundred years, for example, the length of the foot would change depending on the, king or queen's foot at the time. And then I think at some point in the 1600s, they standardized the various measurements. The metric system is quite a bit more scientifically based, and the conversions in metric units are consistent between things like length, volume, and mass. So for example, the conversion factor that you have to use to go from meters to kilometers is the same as what you'd have to use to go from grams to kilograms. That's just one example. And it's based out of France. It developed in the 1700s. And 1 meter, I'm just going to draw this for you actually, is exactly 1/10,000,000th of the distance from the North Pole to the equator. So here's the equator, and it's through Paris. So let's say Paris is over here somewhere, and we look at this arc length over here, part of that circumference. 1 meter is 1/10,000,000th of that length. How many zero? Okay, 2 more of this length. Okay, so that's the definition of a meter. I want to talk about a little bit how to actually measure in the imperial system, because it's not as simple as it may seem. Centimeters are quite a bit easier, and you've probably had experience with this before, because there's 10 millimeters in a centimeter. So each little line, when you're looking at metric units, when you divide a centimeter up, is worth 1/10. So it really works nicely with our decimal system. The imperial system is not like that. So if you look at a ruler and you look at the little divisions from, let's say, 2 inches to 3 inches, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So we actually have to use a mixed fraction when we are looking at various length values in inches, because the tiny little lines don't represent 1/10, they represent 1/16. And once you figure out that mixed fraction, you can convert it into decimals if you wish. So I'll show you what I mean. If we want to know the length of this pencil, it starts at 2, and this is the next whole inch. So this over here represents 5 inches. And then we have over here, the tip goes to here. So that's 1, 2. This part is 2/16 of an inch. So if we put this together, all together, that would be 5 and 2/16 of an inch. And we typically will reduce that if we can. So 2/16 is 1/8, 5 and 1/8 of an inch. And of course, then you could go ahead and convert that fraction into a decimal. So like 1 divided by 8 is 0.125. So altogether, this will be 5.125 inches. Okay, and either one of these is perfectly acceptable. Okay, and sometimes actually it's more useful to have it in decimal form if you're using it to solve a problem, right? Like, for example, if you're trying to find the area of something or possibly the perimeter, it may be more useful when it's in decimal form. Okay, so I would like you guys to try this out. You should have some rulers in the classroom, and I want you to measure all of these line segments in both inches and in centimeters. Okay, so I'm gonna let you guys do that. You guys can check your answers on D2L. The completed notes are on there. If you're off by like 0.1 of a centimeter, that's okay. Okay, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it should be fairly accurate. Okay, so I'm gonna let you guys practice that. The other thing that I wanted to just mention before we move on is show you something on your formula sheet, actually. So I have that up here. And the first part of your formula sheet shows you all of the conversion factors between all of these various units. So on the first column, you have relationships between imperial units. So if you want to convert from one imperial unit to another, you would look here. This is like a, imperial to imperial conversion. Okay, so for example, 1 mile is 1,760 yards, or in feet, it's 5,280 feet. Okay, 1 yard is 3 feet or 36 inches, and then 1 foot is 12 inches. Personally, I actually remember the smaller ones just because I use them a lot. I always have to look up the conversion factor for a mile, though. I never really remember that. Okay. On the far right, you have all of the conversion factors between the metric units. So if you want to convert metric to metric, you have to use these ones. Okay, so 1 kilometer is 1,000 meters, 1 meter is 100 centimeters, a centimeter is 10 millimeters. Okay, and then in the middle, you have the relationship between imperial and metric. So if you want to convert from one system to another, this is where you would go, imperial to metric or vice versa. Okay, so this is something that you should have out as you're doing your work. And when I talk about conversion factors as we go through some problems, this is exactly where I'm looking to get that information. I'm not memorizing it. Okay. All right, so let's go back and talk a little bit more. I'm going to move on to the next page. And I also want to talk about a referent. So you may have heard this word before, you may not have heard this word before, but a referent is a really nice tool to have that allows you to estimate measurements and also to sort of check if something seems reasonable. And basically a referent is an everyday object. Well, it'd be helpful if I turn my pen on. There we go. That is used to imagine or visualize a specific unit. Okay, so any unit that you can think of, you can come up with a referent for that unit. These referents are usually somewhat individual because you want to think about what can you think about in your life that you can use to picture, for example, 1 millimeter or 1 yard. Or even, we're not going to talk so much about mass or volume in this course, but what does 1 pound feel like, for example, or 1 kilogram? Or what does 1 liter look like? That's another example. That would be a volume example. Okay, so these are just examples that I'm coming up with for reference that I use quite a bit, but you can come up with your own. Okay, so for 1 millimeter, I think that's about the thickness of a dime. Okay, for 1 centimeter, I always picture the width of my pinky finger. Okay. For 1 meter, I just think of a meter stick because we see those all the time in classrooms, meter stick. And then 1 kilometer, most adults, when they walk at a normal pace, walk about 6 kilometers per hour. So I would say that this is the distance walked in about 10 minutes. Because if you're walking 6 of them in 60 minutes, you would walk 1 in 10 minutes. Okay, and obviously this is going to vary somewhat based on how quickly you walk, but just roughly the average adult would walk a kilometer in 10 minutes. Okay, now the imperial reference, so the smallest imperial unit of length is an inch. And I always think of like the length of my thumb from the tip to the first knuckle. Okay, so not the whole thumb, but just to the first knuckle. That's roughly an inch. Okay. 1 foot. Well, think about what it's named after, right? So a foot is the length of a foot, usually someone like with a bit bigger feet, length of a large foot. Okay. A yard. So a yard and a meter are actually very similar in length. A yard is about 9 centimeters less than a meter. So sometimes I just think of a meter and then shorten it a little bit. You can also think it's about the width of a doorway. That sort of thing. And then 1 mile is people usually walk around 4 miles an hour. So 4 miles in 60 minutes roughly, and of course I'm, rounding here and approximating, is about the distance walked. In 15 minutes. Okay, so those are some reference that I think about, but then of course you may have your own. If you're a long distance runner, let's say, and you run a 10K in 40 minutes, you might think, okay, 1 kilometer is how far I run in 4 minutes, right? So it really can be somewhat individual. And I know when I teach about, for example, mass or volume in my other classes, I always tend to think about cooking because I do that a lot. And then other people never cook, and so that they don't use those as reference. Okay, now what we're going to do is talk about how to convert units. And I would guess that you've probably done this before. So I want to show you what you've probably seen before. And then I want to show you something called unit analysis. Okay, so what you have probably seen before, let's say you want to convert miles into feet. Okay, so I'm just looking at the formula sheet on another computer. And so I'm going to look up the conversion factor between miles and feet. And I know that 1 mile, whoops, oh boy, where did I go there? Went all the way to the end. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay, that's better. I know that 1 mile is 5,280 feet. Okay, and again, I'm just reading this right off the formula sheet. So some people have learned, and I have certainly taught it this way before, that using this conversion factor, if you're going from one to the other number, you need to multiply by 5,280. And if you go from the other number back to 1, you need to divide by 5,280. Right? So here, if we're trying to convert 0.7 miles into feet, we have to multiply by that conversion factor. Okay, and I'm just going to do that on a calculator. So 0.7 times 5,280, and I get 3,696 feet. Okay, so that's probably something you've done in the past. But I also want to talk to you about unit analysis. And the idea behind unit analysis is that since 1 mile equals 5,280 feet, if you put those numbers into a fraction, either 1 mile over 5,280 feet or 5,280 feet over 1 mile, that should actually equal 1, because it's a length divided by the exact same length. And whenever you take something divided by itself, it's equal to 1. So the idea behind unit analysis is you start with the original measurement, which is 0.7 miles. And then you multiply by the conversion factor in a fraction. And you specifically want the version of the fraction where you have the new units in the numerator and the old units in the denominator. Okay, so here if I look at this conversion factor, okay, 5,280 feet, so that's going to go up here, and 1 mile goes down there. Okay, and the reason why this is kind of cool is that what actually happens is you have miles over miles, and the units cancel. And that's why it's called unit analysis. And so what you're left with to calculate is 0.7 times 5,280 feet divided by 1, which is 3,696 feet. And that's exactly what we got there. Okay, so if you are just asked to convert a unit, you can use either strategy, whichever one you prefer, but you may specifically be asked to show unit analysis. And the reason for that is that unit analysis can actually be a really effective problem-solving strategy when you're working in other fields, like for example, physics, and you know what units you need to end up with. You can kind of figure out what you have to do by getting the units to cancel. Okay, so it is quite an applicable strategy. Okay, now, if we're looking at this second one, 8,612 feet, and we want to go to miles, of course, you can just look at this guy over here and say, okay, this time I'm going from feet to miles. So when I go back to the number 1, I have to divide. So you could absolutely divide by 5,280, but I do want to show you unit analysis. I'm just going to write unit analysis here. Okay, and with unit analysis, the first thing you do is write the original measurement, which is 8,612 feet. And one important thing, and I didn't sort of emphasize this, but I should, is that with unit analysis, keep all the units. Okay, now we want to multiply this by the conversion factor and a fraction with the old units in the denominator. So the old units are feet, and the new units, which is what we want, miles, goes in the numerator. But now if I look at my conversion factor, the 1 mile is in the numerator, and the 5,280 feet is in the denominator. And again, the units cancel. So we are basically left with 8,612 times 1 mile divided by 5,280. And when you do that, 8,612 times 1 divided by 5,280, we get, oops, let me switch back to black, 1.63 miles. And that's just rounded to the nearest hundredth. Okay. All right. Now we are doing a different conversion. We're looking at the yards and feet. And so you could read this right off your formula sheet. And some of you may already know this. 1 yard equals 3 feet. Okay, so that's kind of important to know. Anytime you're converting units, you want to make sure you have that conversion factor down. Okay, now the other complication here is that when you're converting units, you really want the original to be in decimal form. And this is in the form of a mixed fraction. So to figure out what that 11/16 is as a decimal, I am just going to divide 11 divided by 16. And I'm doing that on a calculator right now. And I get 0.6875, okay? Which means that this measurement, 3 and 11/16 yards, is actually 3.6875 yards, okay? And then to do unit analysis, we multiply by the conversion factor and a fraction with the original units in the denominator and the new units in the numerator. Okay, now the feet is 3 feet, so that's 3. The yards is 1 yard. And then again, this cancels. And you are left with 3.6875 times 3 feet divided by 1. And of course, you don't have to do the divided by 1. So I'm just doing that on a calculator right now. And I get 11.0625 yards. Sorry, not yards, feet. There we go, feet. Okay, so I'll just put that in here, 11.0625 feet. Okay, so this is unit analysis, and I really like unit analysis. I'm going to use it a lot. Let's look at some other examples though. Here's another one that this is a different type of question. Convert 51 inches into yards, feet, and inches. I hope you guys are not distracted by all the noises in the background. A lot of my animals and children are making noises right now, so hopefully that's okay for you guys. Convert 51 inches into yards, feet, and inches. So when you see this wording yards, feet, and inches, it doesn't mean convert 3 times. It means how many whole yards do you have, how many whole feet do you have, and then how many inches are left over at the end. Okay, so one thing that's really helpful is to just first write the conversion factor between inches and yards and inches and feet. Okay, so 1 yard is 36 inches and 1 foot is 12 inches. Okay, so what I really like to do with these questions is actually draw it out. So let's say that this is 51 inches. So that's 0, that's 51. Okay, I always say, okay, do I have enough inches to make 1 yard? 1 yard is 36, so I do have enough because I have 51, right? So there's 36 inches, and this represents 1 yard. Okay, now do I have enough to make another yard? Well, if you add another 36, you would get 72. So I don't have enough to make another yard, but I do have enough to make a foot. So if I add 12 to 36, that would be 48. So this part represents 1 foot. And then do I have enough to make another foot? No, because I need 12, but I do have 3 inches left over. Okay, so 51 inches is equal to 1 yard, 1 foot, and 3 inches. Okay, so that's another type of question that you can get. And there's more than one strategy of doing this, but I really, really like this one, and I find it works really well for people. Okay. So here's another question. Oh, never mind. This one is one for you guys to do yourself. So I want you guys to try this. The first one's about converting yards into inches using unit analysis. And then the second one is converting inches into yards, feet, and inches, just like that last example that we just did. Okay, here's another one. Anne is framing a picture. The perimeter of the framed picture will be 136 inches. Okay, first question is, what will the perimeter of the framed picture be in feet and inches? So we want to convert the 136 inches into a certain number of feet and a certain number of inches. Okay, so again, you could draw out 136. Okay, now if you count up by 12s, because 1 foot is 12 inches. Sometimes you can skip a little bit. So for example, I know 10 feet would be 120 inches, right? So I may actually just do this and say this is 120, and then that's 10 feet, right? Because it's kind of annoying to have to count by 12 every single time. And now I'm at 120 and I want to know, do I have another foot? Do I have another 12 inches? And I do, because I actually have 16 inches left. So if I add another 12 here, I'd be at 132. So this is 1 foot. So I added another 12. And now I don't have enough to make a whole nother foot, but I do have in here 4 inches. Okay, so altogether that's 10 feet plus 1 feet is 11 feet, 4 inches. Okay. Here's another question, or part B rather. The framing of material is sold by the foot and it costs $1.89 per foot. What will the cost of material be before taxes? Okay, so really important that you think about rounding here because it's sold by the foot, right? You can't buy part of a foot. Okay, so that's the way it's sold. You can't buy like 11.5 feet or anything like that. You have to buy either 11 feet or 12 feet. So when you're thinking about these types of questions where you have to have enough material, you always round up, right? 11 feet, 4 inches is less than 11.5 because half a foot is 6 inches. So usually you think rounding, if it's less than half, you round down. But in this context, you always have to round up because if you only get 11 feet of material, you're not going to have enough. Okay, so here you need 12 feet. Okay, so the cost is going to be, and in fact, even here the units cancel out, 12 feet times $1.89 per foot. And you can see actually that the feet cancel. So there's more unit analysis coming up. And when you multiply those together, I don't know what that is, close to 24, because 12 times 2 is 24. So what is that? 2268. There we go. Okay. All right, here's another example. The school council has 6 yards of fabric that will be cut into strips 5 inches wide to make decorative banners for the school dance. How many banners can be made? Okay, so we have 6 yards and we want to know how many 5-inch chunks can we cut that into. So one thing that we're going to want to know is how many inches are in 6 yards, right? So 1 yard is 36 inches. So if I'm converting 6 yards, I'm going to multiply by the conversion factor in a fraction where the old goes in the bottom, so that's 1 yard, and the new goes in the numerator, 36 inches. And then yards cancel, and we got 216. Okay? So now we want to know how many 5-inch chunks can we make, right? So if we have a total of 216 and we want to know how many little strips, it would be 216 divided by 5. And that is 43.2. Okay, now we want to know how many whole strips we can make though. So in this case, no matter what the decimal, you have to round down. Because even if it was 43.8, that little 0.8 isn't enough to make a whole nother strip. So whatever the decimal is in this kind of context, you have to round down. Okay, so this would be 43 strips, or banners, I should say, can be made. Okay? All right. So I am going to get you guys to try these 2 questions next. And we're going to talk about a few more, and then that should be it for today. Okay, so here's another example. After meeting in Emerson, Manitoba, Hannah drove 62 miles south and Farron drove 98 kilometers north. Who drove further and by how much? Okay, so this is a question where we're asked to compare distances, and the distances are in different units. So we need to basically have them in the same unit to be able to see which one's longer, okay? Doesn't specify whether we have to have them both in miles or both in kilometers. So we can actually choose here, okay? Now, if you look actually at the formula sheet, I'm actually going to do that really quickly and just show you guys. For the relationship between the two, you actually have both going from miles to kilometers and from kilometers to miles, okay? And in fact, if you look at unit analysis, these represent the same value. So if I think, for example, kilometers over miles, and you do this fraction on your calculator, 1.609 kilometers per 1 mile. I said I was going to talk more about why the miles were MI. The reason miles are MI instead of M is to distinguish miles from meters. There we go. I knew I had to think about something. That should equal, in this version, kilometers over miles. So 1 kilometer over 0.6214 miles. Okay, now 1.609 over 1 is just 1.609. If you take out a calculator and go 1 divided by 0.6241, or 6214 rather, that is 1.609. Okay, so these two fractions are actually equal to one another. So you can use either or. A lot of people really like using whatever version you start from one and then go to the other, but they represent the same thing. Okay. All right. Now, going back to the question that we were just doing. Here we go. After meeting in Manitoba, Emerson, Manitoba, Hannah drove 62 miles south, Farron drew 98 kilometers north. Who drove further and by how much? So let's say we want to convert the 62 miles into kilometers. Okay, now we need to multiply this by old units in the bottom, new units in the numerator, right? So the reason why we have both is that a lot of people like to always put 1 in the denominator. So if you want to, you could use that version of the conversion factor. But as we just saw, it's exactly equal to 1 over 0.6214. Okay, so it really doesn't matter. And here the miles cancel, and we get 99.758 kilometers. Okay, so we can see Hannah drove more by, I guess, 1.758 kilometers. Okay, you could also, though, figure out how far Farron drove in miles. So if we want to convert 98 kilometers to miles, we have to multiply by this same conversion factor, but now the kilometers needs to go in the denominator and the miles goes in the numerator. So you could either multiply by this, the exact same thing, but flipped, right? So now these cancel instead. Or you could do the 0.6214 miles in the numerator divided by 1 kilometer. Okay, it's the same though. And when I do this, 98 times 1 divided by 1.609, I get 60.91 miles. Okay, so we can either say that here, if I go 99.758 minus 62, sorry, not 62. Let me erase that. Minus, we're looking for a difference, right? Because we want to know how much further. Minus, what was it? 98. That's 1.758 kilometers further. And that was Hannah, right? Or in miles, if you take the difference, 62 minus 60.91 is 1.09 miles further. Okay, and again, that's Hannah because the 98 kilometers, this guy, which is 60.91, represents Farron. So this again is Hannah. Okay, so yeah, you can do it either way, especially if it's not specified. You don't have to do both. Okay, so I'm going to let you guys try that next one by yourself. And I think we got a couple more questions to go. Yeah, 2 more. And then we will be done for today. Okay, so Alex is 6 feet 2 inches tall. To list his height on his driver's license application, Alex needs to convert this measurement to centimeters. What is Alex's height to the nearest centimeter? Okay, so 6 feet 2 inches, 2 centimeters. So if you look at the formula sheet, and I'm going to keep flipping back to this, we essentially need to go 6 feet 2 inches, 2 centimeters. Okay, so if you look at feet, there's 1 foot is 30.48 centimeters. And then 1 inch is 2.54 centimeters. So I think we're going to have to do this twice, once for the feet and once for the inches. That's one option. The other option is that you could convert the 6 feet into inches using this, and then add 2, and then convert them into centimeters using this guy. There's lots of ways actually that you can go about this. And often people will have to kind of make a roadmap for themselves. Like, I'm going to convert to this unit, and then from that unit, I'm going to convert to this unit, so that at the end of the day, they have the unit that they want, right? Because sometimes there's not a direct conversion factor. So for example, if I wanted to convert miles into inches, there's no conversion factor between miles and inches. So I'd have to go through something else first. Okay. In this case, it looks like I can just do this guy and this guy. Or I could convert the 6 feet to 12 inches first, add the 2, and then just use this one. Okay, I think I'm going to do the first thing, which was convert the 6 feet to centimeters and convert the inches to centimeters. Okay, so let's go back. Here we go. Okay, so we want to know 6 feet in centimeters. And I'm just looking at the formula sheet now. 1 foot is 30.48 centimeters. So I want the 1 foot in the denominator and the 30.48 centimeters in the numerator. And then these cancel. So that is, let's see, 6 times 30.48. 182.88 centimeters. And then we also need to do the 2 inches into centimeters. And then the conversion factor there is that 1 inch is 2.54 centimeters. So I want the 1 inch in the denominator and the 2.54 centimeters in the numerator. And then again, the inches cancel. So that works out to be 5.08 centimeters. Okay, and then when you add these, the sum, add them together, because that's the total, is, let's see, plus 188.88, 193.96. So to the nearest centimeter, that would be 194 centimeters, because here we're asked to the nearest centimeter. Okay. All right, last example for today. A truck driver knows that her semi-trailer is 3.5 meters high. The support beams of a bridge are 11 feet 9 inches high. Will the vehicle fit under the bridge? All right, well, this would be good information to know if you're driving a truck, right? Can you go under the bridge? So I am so bad at drawing, but I'm going to do my best. Here's like, I'm actually sort of thinking more like a tunnel. And the truck is going underneath. Oh my gosh, you guys, this is going to be so bad. So let me think. Here's a truck. There we go. Oh, that's actually not as bad as I thought. And this is going to go underneath, right? So we want to make sure that this is taller than that. And they're in different units. And in fact, if you're a truck driver and you cross borders, this is a really important thing to know, because in Canada, our official system of measurement is the metric system. But if you go to the United States, it is the imperial system. So all of these signs would be listed in imperial units. Okay, so will the vehicle fit under the bridge? Again, we have to compare here. And the way to compare is to basically have the two values be in the same unit, right? Doesn't matter which one we choose. One thing that you could do, again, no matter what, which would be helpful, is to say, okay, 11 feet 9 inches, what would that be in feet? because then you don't have to worry about converting once you get the either inches or feet for the 3.5 meters. You have to worry about converting that into inches and feet. So remember that 9 inches, there's 12 inches in a foot. So if I convert that into feet, then I'd have the 12 inches in the denominator and the 1 foot in the numerator, and then these cancel. So this is 9 times 1 divided by 12. That's like 3/4. So that's 0.75 feet. Okay, so you may want to think of this measurement, the support beams of a bridge. That's 9.75 feet. And then all we need to do is convert the meters, the 3.5 meters, into feet as well, and then we're sort of off to the races. Okay, so I'm just looking up again my conversion factors, because especially the ones for the imperial to metric, they're all decimal values and they're all approximations, right? Because they're rounded. So I never remember these exactly. Okay, so 1 foot, let me just write this down. 1 foot equals 0.3048 meters, or 1 meter equals 3.281 feet. Okay, and again, this is just like when we looked at miles and kilometers. These actually represent the same thing, because if you look at meters over feet, 0.3481 over 1 would be the same as meters over feet, 1 over 3.281. What is that? 181 feet. There we go. I couldn't read my own writing for a second. Okay, so if I want meter, 3.5 meters to feet, maybe I'll pick the second ones that the 1 is in the denominator. It really doesn't make a difference though. Okay, and then these cancel. And that is, let's see, 3.5 times 3.281, 11.48. Oh, wait, I messed up. This is 11.48 feet. I just realized here that shouldn't be a 9. It's 11 feet 9 inches. So that is actually 11.75 feet. Okay, so this guy is 11.48 feet, and the bridge is 11.75 feet. So the truck should fit underneath, right? But it is pretty close. So I would imagine that some truck drivers would want to give themselves more wiggle room than 1/4 of a foot. 1/4 of a foot is 3 inches, right? That's not very much. Like if you go over a rock, you're going to get stuck, and that's not going to be good. It could cause an accident. And even if it doesn't cause an accident, if trucks get stuck under bridges, the way that they actually get them out is to deflate the tires and then tow them out on the rims. And that would completely destroy your tires. So that would be a pretty costly mistake to make, no matter how you cut it. So personally, I wouldn't take that risk. If you said no, I wouldn't take that risk because it's not very much wiggle room. That, of course, is a totally fine thing to do. If you say yes, it'll fit, you want to live on the wild side, that's fine too. Okay, so I'm going to call it a day for today and get you guys to finish or to start working on your homework, and I will see